Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, and I'm moderating the sixth at Read for Pixels panel in a series of live stream panel sessions with authors and editors held in conjunction with our first ever charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due. This anthology is part of our Read for Pixels program, through which we work with award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness and funds for our work to end violence against women and girls. So today's panel kicks off the Pixel Project's 8th annual International Women's Day edition of our Read for Pixels live stream series. It is also our 11th Read for Pixels live stream author panel. The Pixel Project created these multi-author panel sessions to be an accessible resource for writers interested in writing about female characters and approaching themes such as misogyny, sexism, gender, and violence against women with depth, empathy, and accuracy. And what better topic for our anthology panel session series today than, and I'm sticking this on screen, trauma and stories, helping survivors through storytelling and speculative fiction. And here to participate in the discussion are three of the acclaimed speculative fiction authors who have all contributed wonderfully cathartic stories to our anthology. Angela Yuriko Smith is an American poet, Stoker-nominated author, and co-publisher of Space and Time magazine, a publication that has been printing speculative fiction, art, and poetry since 1966. Hilary Monahan is a New York Times bestselling author of 12 novels, her books spanning the gamut from young adult horror to contemporary romance. And Linda D. Addison is an award-winning author of 5 collections, including How to Recognize a Demon Has Become Your Friend, the first African-American recipient of the HWA Bram Stoker Award. And she also received the HWA Mentor of the Year Award and the HWA Lifetime Achievement Award. Now, Angela and Linda has also generously donated some fabulous and exclusive goodie bundles to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page, and these are available for donors worldwide for Angela's goodies and available for donors in the US, Canada, and the UK for Linda's really awesome poetic justice goodie bundle. So let's just have a little look at what they look like. These are pictures from Angela and Linda. So Angela has 2 different goodie bundles, each one inclusive of signed copies of Giving the Devil His Due and the Bram Stoker Award-nominated Tortured Willows collection of horror poetry by 4 female Asian horror poets, including Angela, Lee Murray, who's another anthology author, Christine Sung, and Jean Flynn, plus goodies ranging from a bit of dirt from Edgar Allan Poe's grave to handmade origami envelopes by Angela herself. And Linda has a bonanza of a goodie bundle for the true horror aficionado, including signed copies of all the books, a signed copy of Giving the Devil His Due with a handwritten poem from Linda for the donor, and a whole lot of fantastic swag tucked in.
I'm going for that, Linda. Everybody back off. I'm going for that. I've got most of those books anyways, but I want those ones.
So you, the audience, will also be able to ask Linda, Hilary, and Angela questions live today. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Anusha Kandasiram, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Hilary, Linda, and Angela to answer. And for those of you who are interested in getting your very own copy of Giving the Devil His Due, you can order it from major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and more. All net proceeds go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives, such as this one, alive and kicking. And now onwards to the panel session. And I'm just going to pause here and say if there's any echoes when I speak or when any of the panelists speak, it's because StreamYard is acting up today. So our apologies in advance. So let's do a quick introduction to today's topic. Now, the Pixel Project has long recognized the importance of stories in the battle to end violence against women, be it hard-hitting documentaries, investigative reports by news media, memoirs by high-profile survivors, or our own advocacy work, which has empowered survivors and activists to share their experiences. Stories are an awareness-raising tool that galvanizes many people to push for the eradication of this human rights atrocity. Additionally, stories and storytelling are not just part of the education and awareness raising toolkit. They have also long been used and documented as a therapeutic strategy that can help people process the trauma that they experience. Whether it's keeping a personal journal, taking part in narrative therapy, or just reading tales of revenge against violent, misogynistic men, which provide much needed catharsis, stories are important in the fight to end violence against women. So, with all that in mind, today's panel session will be discussing how storytelling through speculative fiction, including fantasy, horror, and science fiction, can help survivors process their trauma and heal from everything from domestic violence to rape. And so let's get the discussion started. Now, all of us on this panel are women, and every single one of us has faced some form of violence against women at some point in our lives. Each of you has also included the themes related to violence against women in some of your books and stories. As authors, you are all also voracious readers. So let's start with the basics. In your opinion and/or experience, can reading and writing stories be an important part of healing from or dealing with sexism, misogyny, and violence against women? Let's start with Angela.
Absolutely. It was actually a story that kind of saved me after my issues with my ex-husband, and it was I was suicidal, of course. That was my first impulse. Is I'm just going to end everything, but I have kids, so you can't really do that. But it was writing out how I would commit suicide that really helped, and I think it's that role play of not doing it but experiencing it kind of helped me get through all that. So
yeah. Hillary?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're the victim of violence, in my case it was sex assault sometime back, and it's very you have no power, and there is so much power in creation. You are the god of your own universe. This is your world to build, which is literally the polar opposite of the thing that put you in the position where you're traumatized in the first place. So for me, it was very much taking back a form of power that had been stripped away from me and left me, traumatized afterward, so that I could look at it dead on and I could have it go the way I wanted it to. And it was me taking back the control that I didn't have at the time. And that was very, very empowering for me. So yeah, absolutely.
Linda?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a two-way street in ways that when you're writing a story, a poem, a novel, whatever, that is reflective of what you've gone through personally, that to me, that says that I've reached some level of healing to be able to even talk about and write it, even if it's in metaphor, if it's not exact. And then the other side of it is that if someone's reading it who hasn't gone through it, then you're educating them, even in a fictional way, that this is a scenario. Or they've gone through it, but they're not prepared to look at it. And so now, by being able to look at it inside the zone of a fictionalized story, it also adds to some healing. I also wanted to make a big point from the beginning, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, that this is the reason why we need diverse writing out there, not just Black and women and everything, but everything, every kind of person, because it is in holding secrets in that things don't get healed. It is in not saying things that people who have been hurt destroy themselves inside. And we've all had some version of that we've had to face. Like Angela said, I've certainly had to face that in my childhood and then in college, when I just didn't know how to handle what was happening to me. And I thought that there was no path to handling it. But writing and reading what others have gone through gives you a sense you're not alone. in this terrible battle of trying to heal yourself.
Didn't Maya Angelou do that? She didn't talk for when she was a child. She was assaulted and she didn't talk for a long time, but she wrote a lot, didn't she?
Yeah, and she's not the only one, but yes, that is one point of it. I mean, I know everybody knows I'm like the talking maniac over here, but I didn't really start talking much until I got to college and away from the home that I lived in, that there was so much not goodness.
Yeah, I think the key is the not alone part too, because when I was a kid, I'm the only one that this is happening to. Nobody else knows, nobody else cares, nobody wants to know. But then reading, I'd read stories, horror stories, and then I could attach to that. Oh, other people have this happen. Monsters can be defeated,
Right.
Yeah. So let's dig a little further in to this topic. So in your opinion or experience, what role can speculative fiction like horror, fantasy, and science fiction play in helping women and girls heal or process their trauma, whether as writers or readers? Angela?
I think the biggest part of it to me is it allows us to face the monster, and it allows us to be the monster sometimes. I mean, a lot of my early writing when I was healing would have a girl in it, like a little girl, because that's how I identified at the time, was a very helpless, powerless. I have no power. But then this little girl would have, she was very stabby. She had all kinds of knives, and terrible things happened to everybody who pissed her off. And so that was kind of how I became the monster, to be empowered. And then I could travel from there into different roles, and, less little stabby girls in my stories now. So you can tell I'm in a good spot.
Hillary?
I like this question because horror historically has been very male and very white and very cis and able-bodied. And the fandom is still, there's a lot of that still. And that's not a bad thing. It's definitely way more diverse than it used to be. And it's not like, women and other genders haven't been reading it all along. But when you look at the backdrop, and obviously we're not going back to Mary Shelley here, but when we're looking at the 70s, the 80s and that kind of thing, where horror 60s, 70s, 80s really starts to get its feet under it. It's a very white male dominated field. So what I think is really amazing is as the bracket itself diversifies, it's almost a forced empathy exercise, because unless they're willing to read Cujo for the 87th time, and maybe they are, and no offense to Cujo, I grew up on Stephen King. Those books are part of my creepy DNA. But the point is that this bracket, because of where its backbone was for so long, giving the voices to people of color, giving the voices to the entire gender spectrum, whether cis or trans or non-binary, whatever it is, to disabled people, whatever. It just gives a whole other perspective that a lot of that reader base hasn't seen a lot of. And I feel like that's, it's almost like a little bit of education in a way that's almost, more not like sit down and learn from me type of thing, but it's in a story, and it's an empathy exercise, and it's a bridge builder. And that's awesome, because it is something you can learn from without somebody, with the ruler telling you what you have to learn. And I love that, because the bracket's definitely getting much, much more diverse than it was. And there's so much amazing stuff out there that I think it does a lot of heavy lifting there.
Yes. Linda?
Yeah, I would take from both what Angela and Hillary said, and that is that, I've been working on getting my writing out for 50 years. And in the beginning, like for a long time, there were, first of all, the idea that women couldn't write horror. Women didn't have a lot going on with science fiction 40 years ago, let me tell you. And certainly not Black. I think the other thing I would add to what's been said, which I totally agree with, is the idea that it breaks the stereotype view of people who are not just a particular what has been said. And again, I'm going to probably say this more than once in this thing, the way to break that stereotype view is to let that person say it. To have a man write my story it takes like a special deal. And in the history of men writing women has been stereotypes, not real, not deep, not the feeling. Even you see it with the stumbling thing in movies, falling down. You know what? If we pushing a human being out of us, we know how to run from a monster. So who wrote that movie? Who said that story? It wasn't us. So that's why, again, we need to have continue, because it's just really in the beginning stage, to have diverse voices tell their story, their fictionalized story, or the fictionalized monsters, because all that stuff starts with real stuff anyway.
Yeah, and didn't you say, Angela, that horror has more women reading and watching it now than men?
And I think that's actually something Bela Lugosi said ages ago, back whenever he was doing his stuff. He said that women, because we understand pain so much, because of birthing and regular monthly trips and visits and all that kind of stuff, we know discomfort, and we are very strong. And he said that's why we're attracted to horror. I mean, this was Bela Lugosi way back when. So we're attracted to horror, and I think that's even more now. We are attracted to horror because we have the mantle of victim placed upon us all the time. Like, we're damsels in distresses. That's what we're supposed to be good girls. We're supposed to need a strong shoulder to lean on, and all those other metaphors that are crap. But we're not like that in reality. We are strong. Like Linda said, ever had a baby? Well, that is not a weak thing to do. So, and any number of things, we just tend to be very attracted to that, I think, because of that. It's where we can show that strength and face those things, but not, be singled out for it, maybe.
I think.
Sorry, Hillary, about you. Oh no,
I was just going to point out that it goes along with the true crime thing. We joke about, sitting at home watching true crime documentaries and chill. Well, I mean, that's basically just horror where you strip the fantasy aspect out. I mean, that's what it is. So it's not surprising. A lot of people will quibble about, well, I'm not a horror fan. Well, all right, why don't we talk some facts about Ted Bundy and you can impress me right now? Because they can. And, and it just, I think there's something to be said about that draw to the dark, draw to the violence, draw to the narrative of, who really is a victim, who's not, and how it manifests.
Yeah. And I was going to say, going back to what you were saying earlier, that now that horror has been, steadily diversifying with more and more diverse voices over the years, representation matters. And, if we as women sit there and read a story about, woman getting the best of a domestic violence abuser, we're going to feel better, at least for a little while. And this is the feedback, and these are the reviews that we've been getting for the anthology. Have you gone to Amazon? Yeah, people are going, this is catharsis. And someone actually said, well, now that I've read this, I don't need to go murder my brother-in-law.
I saw that one.
So anyway, we're going to talk about, let's go into the nuts and bolts about writing as catharsis and as a way to process trauma. So there are many types of written storytelling formats that survivors and victims can use as part of the toolkit for healing from trauma. These include writing private journals, publishing a memoir, and blogging about their experiences. So what can writing speculative fiction like horror, fantasy, and science fiction specifically offer to victims and survivors that other forms of therapeutic written storytelling cannot? Let's go with Angela.
I think that the beauty of the speculative genre is the lack of judgment. There's certain things you can't say in polite company. You can't be at a nice dinner or maybe at church or wherever and say, these horrible things happen to me. We just culturally tend to not do that. We hide it. Which is where it can thrive, in that hidden space. But in horror and science fiction, we take that otherness and that the wrong thing and the freakish thing and the scary thing and the ugly thing. And that is what we are looking at. We're trying to see that thing. So I think that's why particularly our genre of speculative is so powerful for that, because we are not promising a happy ending, but we are promising that you can fight and that there are things that can be done. And it's certainly not a passive experience. And so, yeah, it's that lack of judgment and that openness to in our genre that I think is the key to that.
Hillary?
I've always looked at horror as a hope narrative, and I know how weird that is. But even in the middle of regardless of how the ending goes, whether or not it's positive or negative, you as a reader, because you have, in theory, if it's done right, clung to the narrator, the protagonist, the whatever, it is an exercise in hope. And you're hoping against hope that things are going to turn out okay. And a lot of the time it does. Sometimes it doesn't. So I feel like, to a point, what's really nice about it is that you're going to get that hope narrative, and you're also going to get the satisfaction of being able to stab it. You can't stab misogyny. No, I mean, seriously, like the systematic issues like misogyny, queerphobia, racism, ableism, you can't stab them. I mean, we would if we could, and they'd be dead by now. So it gives a creator an opportunity to give a shell and a little bit of hope, because you can hope at the end of this story, this monster can actually be stabbed. So to me, the spec fic lets you put a face to a thing that is usually too big to encapsulate, and too big for one person to be able to handle all on their own. But all of a sudden, you arm a chick with a chainsaw and you can cut some pieces off of it, and it feels a lot more manageable. And because it's really unlimited. I mean, spec fic is unlimited. So it's as long as you can carry your reader to believe what you're saying, you can do anything with it. And that means you can put a face on the monster, whatever the monster might be, even if it's a gigantic social construct. So.
Linda?
Yeah, I mean, again, everything that's been said by Angela and Hillary really strike me also. And there's a thing about being able to write it or read it, either way, where, again, you're ready to sort of face this pain and trauma inside, but in a safer environment, so that whatever emotion that you go through, when the anger comes up, the fear and other things, that that in a point your feelings may be attached to some real thing that happened, but you're in your safe home, hopefully. So I think also one of the things that it does is that it gives different ways of looking at a scenario, like a scenario of, like a Lovecraft Country, and they talked about, the towns that didn't want the sundown towns. Well, it's a different, and there was monsters involved, like human monsters and monsters, but things were not always what they looked like. So, I mean, it was a way of taking a situation that was a lot of real things and making it in a way that as you approach that, like, oh no, what's going to happen? The person who created that story in a book or visual form then gives you, as has been said before, some sense of power and hope, because then it doesn't go exactly the way maybe that thing did go, for real. So I think there's some power there also.
And so every form of therapeutic storytelling has its particular strengths and drawbacks. What should survivors keep in mind if they decide to try their hand at writing horror, fantasy, or science fiction as part of processing their trauma? Let's go with Linda.
Okay, this one really hit me also, because when I first started writing speculative, I wrote science fiction and fantasy because I had just spent the first 18 years of my life in a fearful, horrible growing up situation. So I wasn't really ready to deal with that. When I started writing that, it was because I was feeling more secure in myself. And one of the things that I think is really important is to be gentle with yourself if you're writing it. maybe writing it in journal form, and I write everything in journal, as everyone knows, maybe writing it in journal form and without thinking someone else is going to read this, that I have to explain it or whatever. You can just write the rawness of what you feel as gently as you can. If you feel like you're going into a really unsafe zone, that you don't want to go there. You have to figure it out. I mean, it took me a while of writing in my journal about things and writing versions of the story where I was really ready to write my everything that I've written the last 20, 30 years of horror, because I had to feel safe enough with myself in order to write it. So I think if you're writing it, you have to really be able to know in yourself that you're safe, and maybe even write it if you're afraid somebody gonna read it, because the cycle of expressing it is so powerful and healing. So if you write it and then you feel like you got to burn it because you don't want nobody to read it, do that. I think there's a lot of paths to do this, to get yourself to the point where you really want to have someone read some fictionalized version of what you really went through.
Okay, Hillary?
So if you write to publish, people read it. And when people read it, they suddenly have opinions on your lived experience that is trauma. It can take your legs out if the experience that you're relaying does not cross them or hit them the same way. Because, the question is about the craft and the warning in the craft of doing it, not whatever. But one thing that I don't know that everybody's prepared for is when you tackle these hugely intimate subjects, you're effectively ripping the journal open, like Linda, was talking about, and you're showing those journal pages to everybody. And then some guy, from Colorado is going to critique it and give it 2 stars because it wasn't, visceral enough, or it wasn't whatever. So I think as far as if you're writing as a form of therapy for yourself, it's different. If you're writing as a form of commercial fiction or fiction that is going to be publicly critiqued, I think it's a thing of, if we're doing the advice portion of the programming, it's be sure that you have proper boundaries, whether that's don't read reviews or have somebody else read your reviews for you, or understand that, as my light goes off, because of course it does, or understand that basically what you're doing is you're exposing your wounds, and some guy's going to be like, well, you didn't use a verb here, you used an adverb and I hate it. I mean, like, so from, 2 stars, missing comma, page 37. But like, so I think if you're talking about putting it out there, I think it's be kind to yourself and have a plan of how to cope with that feedback before it happens, so that you're not crying into your Cheerios that somebody isn't vibing with your effectively self-insert story of sex abuse. But I wouldn't know anything about that. So that's my craft advice.
Angela?
I love what both of you said. Taking I always think of Dumbledore when he takes the thoughts out of his head and he puts them in the pensieve and now they're gone. That's what I always think of, like that journaling kind of thing. And having the boundaries, the thick skin, making sure you have, if you're going to publish something that's very, very personal, have a support group, maybe kind of ready, so that when you are like, they don't think that this real experience that happened to me, that I just bled onto the page, is written believably. That hurts when it really happened to you. So have that support group, kind of in place. That's another one. But I also think allow yourself time to grieve. There's been a couple things that I've written that, and when you've written a bunch, you kind of approach it like, okay, this is the theme, and writing it from this point of view, this is the word count, these are the nuts and bolts that have to happen. And then all of a sudden you're in the middle of it and you're bawling or something, or you're like, I can't write this anymore, because writing is ultimately an emotional thing. We're tapping into our psyches and bringing it out on the page for other people, or just to burn. But whatever it is, we're bringing it out. And sometimes that can basically rip off the Band-Aid, open up old wounds. And, you know, the first time, because I think of myself as a very non-emotional person, the first time that happened to me, I think I spent most of the time going, what is wrong with me? You know, do I have COVID? Oh my gosh. You know, did I eat something? Am I having an allergic reaction? I don't know what this water is in my eyes. And later I kind of, you know, it connects now that when that happens and I'm feeling that like, okay, I have just touched a nerve that I didn't realize I still had. I can step back. I can take a day to just eat some chocolate and mourn something that I might not even remember clearly anymore, but obviously it's still there. So, you know, everything that Linda said, everything that Hillary said, and also just allow yourself time to grieve.
You actually just answered the next question, but yeah, that's
sorry.
Well, it's funny because, you know, what Angela just said reminded me that, you know, another thing to consider is if you're writing from a place of personal experience of violence, you're usually writing and relaying a position of powerlessness. And there are very few things that will frustrate a reader more than a character who is powerless. And because what happens is you'll write, you know, in my case, a sex assault, and then there will be a reader who will be like, well, you could have done X, Y, and Z in that scenario. If I was there, then I would have done this. You need to be prepared for that person because, you know, and you know, I have actually been faced with that person. And my answer was, you know, it's really funny. When you think you're going to die, you either want to pee, you freeze, or you run away. And I couldn't run away. So it was either pee or freeze. And I didn't pee. So, you know, I mean, but you need to, like, it's a thing of, the other thing is that angle of it. But like I said, what Angela, and it ties into what Linda was saying too, is if you're doing your job right, the reader feels the powerlessness of your protag in that situation, and it might piss them off. And you know what? In a way, that's good because it means you did it right.
Yeah. Welcome to
right.
Yeah. And also, don't be the perpetrator now, because this is how it feels.
Yeah, and what Hillary said just now, it's also an extension and reflection of victim blaming culture. I mean, you still keep hearing the same refrain. Why didn't she leave him? Why didn't she fight back? Why, you know, no matter how much, I mean, I can tell you in my 13 years of working in the movement to end violence against women, we keep hearing this. No matter how many scientists did how many studies to show that, you know, freezing is a really common reaction when you're being raped, or, you know, not leaving. You know, it takes an average of 7 times before a victim will leave her abuser. You know, no matter how much we shout about this, like, it's still there. And I think the reaction that Hillary got to her story, it's a reflection of that person still being in the victim blaming mode.
Well, and that's one reason.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Linda.
I was going to say again, like I said, I know I'm going to be harping on this, but I don't care. This is why it's so important for each, you know, diverse group out there to be telling their story, whether it's fictionalized or not, because I can talk about my story. But if someone else in a culture that has been published often enough, that is not me, don't even look close to me, and even trying to look close to me, writes it, they're going to write it in some kind of stereotypical, non-clear, empathetic, psychological way. And I'm like, no. So that's why it's really important to have people write their own story who have gone through these things. And again, when I write it, I am saying through a fictional view, because that's what we do. You know, I mean, I've had people earlier on my first book, I had a story in it, and that involved a fictional version of my father. Anyway, so someone was like, "Is that your dad?" I was like, "I'm a writer. I write fiction." I don't have time to have a conversation. I'm not having a conversation with anybody about anything that I've written and connecting it to real life, because that is something that unless you're my therapist, counselor, family, you know, there's a whole lot of people I will talk to about, but not someone who just comes up to me and goes, "Is this your father?" No, is that your father? That's what I say.
It's everybody's father. It's fiction, baby.
So, Angela, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say that victim blaming. That's one reason why this is so important. Like these stories that speculative fiction comes out with in this viewpoint, because going to the freezing thing. That's one of the common things you always hear is well, she didn't like it. She should have said something. If she's frozen in fear and terror,
I thought I was going to die. I mean, people don't
exactly.
like that. You don't know where this is going to go. And if you're like me, you have seen every documentary in history and you know exactly what creeps people can be. So you have no idea what the end point of this story is. So in the moment, you're thinking, well, I don't know if I'm going to get out of here. You know, and but people are always very, very brave from the stands.
Everybody has an axe in their hammer space, right? That's what every hair, just pull that axe out. I had it right here the whole time, but in reality, it's much different.
Yeah. And so let's go more into what you were saying earlier, Angela, in which I said you answered the next question, which is, so sometimes when, survivors proceed with activities like writing and reading that can help them heal from their trauma, they still stumble across unexpected triggers. So what advice can y'all share about dealing with triggers that surface during the writing process? Hillary?
I mean, I think Angela's recommendation of having that support group is pivotal. I am very, very fortunate in that I effectively have a second chosen family that are all involved in the arts. And when I shoot myself in the foot with feelings, which I do with fair regularity, they're there to talk with me, to help me, and I'm very, very lucky to have that, because The Hollow Girl was called The Hollow Girl because it's about disassociation and what happens to you as a person after an attack. And, the whole book was just like opening up a very rancid tuna can of feelings. Like, no, I didn't want to go there, but I did, but I didn't. It was very much a mixed. There were times where I was like, I want to quit this because it hurts. I don't want to do this. But being done with it and having the end product and having people that I trusted that I could say, wow, this was really hard. And they went, I understand. Here's a cookie. It mattered. It mattered a lot.
Linda?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, first of all, is being self-aware enough to understand that you're being triggered. Right. And as writers, when you start writing, I think part of what we do is we become more aware of the connection between our feelings, our thoughts, and, everything else. So when you see that, it's so important, as has been said, to have support, to have family, to have friends that you feel you can trust. If it's too much, then, like I said, write it and burn the paper and go to counseling. Know that you always have that. Don't try to do these things by yourself if you feel that it's building up so much that it's interfering with your daily life. And I will say that to say this. People sometimes look at going for help in that way, to helplines for suicide, for violence, as some kind of weakness. If you are writing something that you feel you need that level of support for, that is such a positive sign of healing. That is a huge sign of healing, because humans are targeted to go into denial to survive and not destroy themselves. So if you're getting to the point where you're shaking yourself up, that's a good sign. And if in that shaking up, you need to go and talk to a counselor or somebody else so that you can sleep, eat, and get through that, then you do. Because like I said, my writing, the one scene that was the hardest thing that I wrote years ago, I didn't show that to anybody. And then I built it into a story that's in How to Recognize the Demon, because I was ready to do that. But I went through a lot to be able to be willing to put it out and let other people read it. Even though it's fictionalized, it still was a thing.
So are you saying, and I might be reading too much into this, that when you write the fiction, when you write those stories and you start processing your trauma, that maybe triggers that you weren't aware were there could also be signposts that are blaring out that you need to get help and you should get help?
Absolutely, without a question. And that it's a good thing. You know, I mean, if it's so much that you really can't even write it to yourself, then don't wait until you are ready to do that. But if you are ready to do that and you're feeling what you just said, absolutely the truth.
Okay. Angela?
Everything these two amazing ladies have said. And then I'll add to it. I think of them as like life hacks or whatever, but I have certain videos and certain songs that will guarantee this makes me laugh or guaranteed this makes me feel empowered. And I will listen to that song on repeat. I think one of them is I Will Survive. Of course, that's kind of a no-brainer. Is it Gloria Rayner that does that?
Gaynor.
Okay, I knew it was like, yeah, thank you. I knew I was close. Another one was that Imagine Dragons one that I can't remember the title.
Radioactive.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, you know that one. So, and I would sit there and listen to these songs because it's kind of like my helplessness or my depression or whatever I was going through can kind of tie on to that prepackaged mood or that prepackaged empowerment and just get that little bit of boost to come up. And also just videos sometimes. I actually have one of me that was taken by my Ring camera one time, and I had chosen to go outside in my short dress with no underwear on because I was just getting the mail, right? And I didn't expect the porch to be icy. And I fall on the ice and bust my butt and flash the entire park across our house. And it's just the most ridiculous thing ever. But when I start taking myself too seriously, I watch that video. If I start beating myself up about like, oh, you know, I missed this paragraph in this thing that I was supposed to be publishing, or I got so-and-so's name wrong, and, you know, or I didn't truly present this the way I should have, and I made this mistake, then I go watch that video and remember, oh yeah, I'm a human. I do ridiculous things like flash the park, you know, or I'll watch a funny video and then that's enough to break that kind of mood that if I don't do that, I know myself. I'll just keep feeding it and feeding it and feeding it until it's so big that I can't handle it anymore.
Is it possible to write? I mean, sorry, Linda, I was just going to say, is it possible to write when you're writing speculative fiction to process your feelings and start healing? Is it possible to do it without triggering yourself, or is it not possible?
I think it is possible. What I wanted to add before, I know you didn't ask me to answer it, but I think self-care, okay? Let's just use those words, self-care. Whatever you're writing, you know, like how far you want to go with it is how much you need to take care of yourself. And if you're willing to crawl over glass with that, and then you're like sitting there feeling like crap, you know, what can you do to be nice to yourself? I always refer to that part of me that's really, there's a part of me I call little Linda. And sometimes when I'm working, little Linda's like, you know, hurting, she's not sure about this, triggered, whatever. And then is the time I will stop and do something like Angela's talking about. I'm like, okay, little Linda, let's take a walk. Let's go out and play in the yard. Let's trim, you know, let's do something else because I don't want to live in that past of pain. But you can't, denial doesn't make it go away. You have to find ways to deal with it. So I feel like for me personally, I can't say for anyone else, I've been through therapy many times, good ways, good therapy, not repeating. I've taken meds for depression. I've done all that stuff and I feel good about life because that, you know, all those choices, counseling, you know, meds when I just couldn't get to a point where I could really like get through a day without crying were all good things of self-care to me. And so when I write, and I also think as far as triggering is concerned, I mean, I kind of feel like this again with my writing, my journals have the raw stuff in it quite often, but when I put it in there as of the last 10 years, I do it in a metaphorical way. So I have said this before. I could write a poem about an apple and be talking about racism. So, there are ways to write about things that make people feel it, and at the same time make them sometimes think, what is this again? What's going on? And they make the connections also. I've also written poems that there was no question of, but I think in telling stories, sometimes the telling of the story is not always like people suck. I mean, they do, but that's not a very interesting poem.
Hillary?
Yeah, I think you can write without triggering yourself. I think having an honest conversation with yourself of what being triggered looks like for you personally ahead of time, so that you know when that slippery slope appears, what's going to happen. I have tics. When my anxiety is driving the bus, I will do certain things. So there are some days that I'll see that precipice of I'm going too far coming, and I'll lean into it because I know I can handle it that day. It was a good day. I didn't freak out that morning about anything. I was secure in myself. I was, yes, this is a bit risky, but I can do it. And then there are days where I will literally go work on a romance novel. There's a reason why I write horror and romance. And it's because one lets me do the escapism that I need to do that gets me away from those darker things. I love to write comedy, and it's because I love creation. Creation is catharsis. Horror is where the pain goes. And so, it's one of those things that sometimes I'll have that conversation with myself of where I'm at, what can I handle today? And then I'll choose my art accordingly. And sometimes it's not words at all. Sometimes it's beating or whatever it is that I'm doing. But yeah, I do think it's very possible to do it without triggering yourself. I think it takes self-awareness, as Linda has mentioned a few times at this point in time. And, a plan, as Angela mentioned. It's just, you need to be prepared. And it's pretty much like anything else.
Angela, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and I think in some form we will be triggered, but the key is having that plan ahead of time, and knowing yourself, like Hillary was saying too, know who you are. I know when I get upset, I start working really hard. I will go 16 hours and it's so I don't have to think. If you ever want me to take on your crazy project, let something really traumatic be happening in the news or something, then ask me, because I'll be like, yeah, because I need a distraction. I need 5 more anthologies to put together right now. But it's so I don't have to think. But because I kind of realize that about myself, I can reach that point of, okay, this is triggering me. I can give myself that space to grieve, and recognize those things that are coming up. Okay, Angela, you just said you're going to do 20 reviews by midnight tomorrow. Do you really want to do that? Or are you doing that as a reaction to something else? Oh, you're doing it as a reaction. You haven't grown as much as you think. So now go back and tell those people, hey, I'm human. I'm sorry. I was reacting or whatever, but I can't do those 20 reviews by midnight. And maybe I can do them in a month, or maybe, but it's opening that dialogue and just recognizing that, this is where I stand. This is who I am. This is what I can handle. And so I feel like now, and these words will probably bite me in the butt next week because I said this, I feel like I can handle just about anything from my past that comes up, and I can handle in that way that I process it by metaphor, like Linda was saying. That's not always the case. I mean, my first book, there was a long time I couldn't write anything about myself, almost not even a bio, because everything about my personal experience I was ashamed of, traumatized by, didn't want to talk about, didn't exist. I didn't exist to me. And so I wanted to get through that when I kind of realized that. So I went to hypnotherapy and found out that the reason why I couldn't write about myself was because I wasn't worried about anything but being called a liar. And I'm literally a fiction writer. That's not a good thing to be worried about. Well, at the time I was nonfiction, so, and this actually, that was Escape Clause. The poetry / memoir book that I came out with was that healing project.
Love
And
that book.
That's one reason why I don't talk about it that much, because that was like super very personal. And so it's not like I don't like it or anything, but it's just one of those things that, well, I don't really like to just rip Band-Aids off for no reason. So, but
Yeah.
I love that book.
Thank you.
So if you just joined us, we are chatting about reclaiming power and helping survivors heal through storytelling and speculative fiction. If you have any questions for the panel, please type them into the YouTube chat box next to the screen, and we'll read it out for Hillary, Angela, and Linda to answer while they're still on air. So get your questions in now. So let's go to the flip side. Let's talk about reading. So reading stories can be a part of healing, and that it's another way that speculative fiction can help victims and survivors of violence against women. And earlier I mentioned that representation matters, and speculative fiction can provide the stories and books to help survivors recognize and process their trauma, or even just read them as a form of personal catharsis as part of the healing journey. As we know from all the Amazon reviews of the anthology, catharsis, that's the one word that keeps coming up over and over again in Goodreads and Amazon. That's the one word. What role do you think published speculative fiction stories and books about violence against women can contribute to the wider conversation about dealing with sexism, misogyny, and healing from experiences of gender-based violence? Hillary?
So I was really mad after the disassociation went away. My next go-to feeling post my assault was rage, and not the good kind that makes like public change happen, but the kind that makes you just a butt and nobody wants to be around you and whatever.
I've been there.
Reading somebody else's rage, reading that there's a dichotomy of feelings, that it's not all like, you're not all sad all the time, you're not all mad all the time, you're not all, it's like the grief pattern. It's just this weird roller coaster of feelings. So reading these stories can show you that the gamut of what you went through that made you feel so like you're doing victimhood wrong. Oh my gosh, it's so reassuring to see somebody else touch on an aspect of yourself when you were in that position. You're looking for anybody in the world to say, I completely understand what you went through and I'm sorry. And when people haven't lived it, or people haven't been there, it feels a little bit like placating me. But when I'm reading it in the art and somebody nails it right in the head, and I'm like, I feel seen, and it's very validating. It validated my anger, and it validated my emptiness, and it validated my sadness about what was lost. And I think that's where reading these experiences can really help. I also think, my particular story for the anthology was not a cut and dry story. And I did it on purpose, because is this emotional abuse or is it not? And that was what I wrote, because I also want to let the people know that are going through this stuff that sometimes it's not cut and dry. It's not simple. It's not easy. And people aren't going to understand why it's so harmful to you. And I want those people to feel seen too, that it's not always this super easy bad guy, good guy thing. And again, it's all about being seen, making sure everybody's experiences are there and seen so that the validation happens.
Linda?
One of the things I thought about when I was thinking about this is that along with the being seen and knowing that you're not alone kind of thing, is that it can help you realize that you were victimized, but you're not a victim. It can show you You know, once you realize that you're not wrong, you weren't broken, you didn't do anything wrong, but you can still see in many of the things that you read, people being victimized, but not being victims, finding their strength, finding their anger, finding their way. And if it's good enough horror, find some way to act out on that. I'm not going to say how. I'm just saying there's knives involved sometimes. So, not anything that you would do in real life. You know what I'm saying? But
just think about it a little. Just a little murder. Just a little.
I think the most important part is that, you know, when I think about, I've been interviewed a lot, and there was one person that talked a lot about how, you know, you don't write about people who are victims. And I said, no, but I will write about people who have been victimized in any kinds of ways that, you know, crazy humans can do that. But, you know, it's a way to let the person who's reading it see that the shift of reality, you know, is that they're not a victim, even if they've been victimized. I think that's so important.
Angela?
It's the words therapeutic murder came to mind, but, you know, we're talking fictionally. The viewpoints in this panel are not necessarily the viewpoints of but going to what both of you said, it's role play. It's kind of the strength of it, because we can try on these roles, like Hillary is saying. I feel seen, you know. There's this person. I am not the girl, the cute girl with the blonde hair running through the forest. That is not me. I will never identify with her. Oh, but wait, there's that character over there. I feel seen because that character is real to me, you know, because that writer presented her in a way that I can digest that information. But so it's the role play part. We get to kind of work through our feelings and stuff by experiencing it through other eyes. But I think it's also kind of role model in a way. And when we are responsible writers, like Linda's saying, you don't have to write it as the victim. Bad things happen to people. They don't have to defeat us. And we can build characters like that role model these voices and these reactions for people that are victimized in the same vein. And also, I always kind of hope, one of the reasons why I started writing fiction is because the idea had occurred to me. I'd been doing newspaper work for ages, but the idea occurred to me that, like, if I could maybe scare pedophiles, you know, write something so horrible that you would never want to do that. That was kind of my initial goal, besides actually shutting up some guy who said that nonfiction people don't have imaginations. I shut him up, all right, but now I'm hooked on fiction, so, you know, who really won here? But it was the idea that if I could write something horrible enough and terrifying enough that maybe I could, and this is super, you know, big dream pie in the sky, maybe I could write something that would stop somebody from being like that, like somebody who's fantasizing about raping or something, or fantasizing about some of this violence, and they read something where, look what happened to that guy, you know, look what happened to this person that did that. You don't want to go there, because little girls can have stabby knives. And so that was kind of one of the things I think is good for it as well.
So I'm just going to put this comment by our YouTube moderator on screen. So in case anyone was wondering, Hillary's story in the anthology is The Devil's Pocket Change. Angela's is Justice League, and Linda's is Finding Water to Catch Fire. So if you have the anthology, or maybe you don't, go get a copy. Go check out all the stories. And Angela's story is really wishful thinking, though.
Only could just have a magic card.
Yeah, magic card going, just us, you know, nobody would know, just us, you know. And wow, they really did a number on, you know, those horrible men.
Yeah.
So what speculative fiction books have helped y'all with healing from your experiences of sexism, misogyny, and violence against women? Let's start with Hillary.
Oh God. So I love angry girl narratives a lot. I like the mad girls, and you know, Rin Chapico writes incredibly good angry girls. I'm a big fan of Rin's, and Courtney Summers writes really good angry girls. These are YA titles, by the way, because I'm a YA author. So these are the first two that came to mind. Mary San Giovanni writes very good angry girls. Yeah, yeah, both of them. And I like me some angry girls. So those are some authors. I'm not going to name specific titles because off the top of my head, I'm going to draw blanks. But those are three that immediately came to mind with the question. Mary in particular can write some vicious witches, and it's pretty great. So those are three authors I think would be definitely worth checking out in that regard.
Okay, Linda?
All I can think of is if back in the day when they thought women couldn't write horror, they didn't read Mary's books. Because
Terry Clark. Zin Rockland also writes wicked angry women and is awesome at it. So
I love Zin's work.
Zin's amazing.
So amazing. It's this, as I said, when I first started reading, I wasn't really ready to get myself afraid. So it was all like science fiction and fantasy. And now, as I was thinking of this when Angela said it, there's not much in my past that I'm afraid of anymore. I mean, you spend enough time in therapy with meds and writing, you kind of get there. Anyway, one of the early writers that I read, like I said, back in the day when there wasn't a lot of science fiction by women, was my Nancy Kress. This is one of her later books. I have a whole bunch of them over there. I was very drawn to Nancy Kress's work, many years ago, because she was female and she was writing these, intricate, stories and tales, and it just felt very freeing and powerful to be like, I can do that, Now, later, rolling forward a little bit to Natalie Dew, who wrote horror. I thought she was going to be the first Black to win the Bram Stoker, because I went to the Stokers when she was up on the final ballot, and I was just barely ready to get scared myself with my own stuff. And so once I read her first book, I like to buy everything. I love her work. I love the strength of her characters. Black, it doesn't matter, but it's nice, for change. Anyway, N.K. Jemisin is another author who anything they write, like people have been mentioning people that anything they write, N.K. Jemisin's wonderful adventures. And at the same time, there's always something going on in there with characters and, different kinds of people that is entertaining and educational at the same time. So, and one last one, Milton. I'm going to say a guy, Milton Davis. He has, when his very first book came out, and he has several of them, he would write these wonderful ventures with African versions of an African society. And for me, that was just so, wonderful breath of air, because I grew up reading everybody and everything in school that were not looking anything close to me. And I really very much enjoy his work.
Angela?
There's actually a story in the old, I used to be super into the Alfred Hitchcock anthologies when I was a kid, which, yes, anybody who's ever heard me answer this question is like, oh God, just going to talk about Alfred Hitchcock again. But I was so into these anthologies. As a child, thought he was the writer. I didn't find out he wasn't a writer until I was like 30. And I didn't know he did movies. I'd seen Psycho, but I never connected. He was the guy who did all the writing, the stories that I love. And there was one in particular by Theodore Sturgeon called Shadow, Shadow on the Wall, that when I read that as a kid, a lonely, beat up kid with, pretty, like, that's what I felt like is that boy in that story. And he's empowered through the shadows. And, without telling you blow by blow of this whole thing, in my life at that time, I was alone a lot in my house. I'm a latchkey kid. And I was always afraid of shadows. And here was this story that told me these shadows could be my friend. These shadows could be my vengeance. These shadows could be salvation, kind of thing. So, and any Christian probably watching this is like, no, stay away from the shadows. But saying it was an empowering story so much that as this kid, I was in second grade. that story stayed with me. Of course, I didn't remember the title, didn't remember the author. I thought it was Alfred Hitchcock. But later, when I kind of put everything together, I went on a hunt for that story and found it, got the anthology, still affects me the same way. And then there was another book that I read as a kid. I think I was probably in 3rd grade. I probably shouldn't admit that I read this book in 3rd grade. But I found it in a hidden box. It was not given to me by a responsible adult. I searched that thing out. And I just got a copy of this. I, yes, have paid $30 for a used smut paperback. But it was The Succubus, and I read it in 3rd grade. And I had no idea what she was doing and why she took so long to kill this guy. But I do remember just kind of, it was the first time I had seen a woman character as the one in power. And this poor schmutt in this book is helpless. Like she's the one with all the power. And I think that's what affected me. And like I said, 100% honestly, I had no idea what they were doing for most of the book. Now I realize, and I'm like, ooh, I should not have had that book. But I did. And yeah, it was just really, really good for me to see that character, you know, not all the things that the characters were doing. And I'm actually afraid to read it now as an adult because I was like, you know, I'm 53. I don't know if I need that kind of heat in my life. Now that I do know what they're doing. But yeah, it was really good for me to have that. So I would say that those 2 stories, but like, it's going to be different for everybody. Everybody will find that thing. Like, who would say, oh, you know what, you need 3rd grader to be empowered? A copy of The Succubus by Kenneth Rayner Johnson. So,
I should have mentioned Alyssa Wong and Cass Kaw as well as 2 creatives who are doing amazing, amazing work out there. And I mean, there's Le Guin, you know, like there's going to be, if you haven't read Beloved, why, you know what I mean? Like there's certain things that are out there that there's so many. And yeah, I like me angry people. I don't know. They're my people. The angrier the better.
I have a long list of people too. I just try to go to the earlier levels.
I know.
I was like, so many.
I'm always so bad at book recs because I can think of like 17 after I finish my turn. So,
you know, I was just thinking, I was grinning just now because I was just thinking when Angela was talking about, you know, reading The Succubus in 3rd grade, that right now, whatever the books that we're talking about right now, like all the school boards in Missouri and Texas are all having a heart attack.
Probably, yeah. Good.
Yeah. Well, then we'll have less book banning.
Yeah, there's a question from the audience. So Misty 306, she attends all our sessions because she's cool like that. And she said, in your opinion, which book about female survivors in speculative fiction has the best representation? Let's go with Linda.
I'm going to steal this from Angela. You know I'm going to say Sycorax's Daughters. Come on now. Because that is, she got the book so she can do the show and tell and I'll talk. That came out in 2016 or 17. And I was one of the 3 women editors, Black women editors of it. It's the first collection of stories and poetry by Black women in horror. And what you will find in here is such a huge variety of stories, but there's always, you really start to see this underlying thing of women dealing with the, you know, whether it's ghosts or whatever, the power that comes with having to face the fact that, like, what it means to have a child, what it means to have a relationship that hurts you, what it means to go through all the different versions of it from, you know, from A to Z. And since these were all written by women, and like I said, some of it's a lot of poetry, a lot of stories, but you don't come to the end of these stories with a sense of weak victims. You come to the stories and the poems to see another facet of how dealing with a horrible situation, the power, the strength, the facing it that a woman can come to, as it is with my story that's in Giving the Devil His Due. I like to think I gave it a nice twist at the end because I love doing that in poetry too. But I mean, the point of the story that I have in that book is not about this woman and what she's gone through with the with being victimized. It's a matter of her seeing it all, seeing the whole picture of it, and learning and seeing the strength in herself. And in Sycorax's daughters, you have like 33, I think, different Black women who are telling a different kind of story. Each, like I said, from back in the day with slavery to forward into a future, but it always comes to show you what the strength is that comes through those experiences.
Hillary?
Well, that was the one I was going to say too. So
thanks, Linda.
The three of us are all saying the same book, I think. So that's a good thing. I'm going to add in Hex Life, which was done by Rachel Autumn Deering and Christopher Golden. Diverse group of writers, as I recall. Just some amazing stuff in there. That was another one that I really, really walked away from being. And I mean, I will admit I'm in it. I'm not trying to be that person, but the rest of the book is what I'm talking about. So, you know.
You're on board too. It's okay.
Well, I wrote about a
excellent
Texas mom whose queer kid was getting picked on at school, so she took on the school committee. It seems very relevant right now. But, you know, that one came to mind, and Sycorax's daughter was the other one I was going to say. So there we go.
Yeah, I love Hex Life as an anthology. They have a wonderful variety of work in there.
Angela, what's your recommendation?
Well, I was going to say Sycorax's daughter, but I can also say Black Cranes, because that's kind of the same thing. It's a bunch of, and I do have two stories in there, but it's Asian women speaking from the perspective of writing horror, like our experiences through an Asian lens and what it's like to be a female writing horror. And they're all fiction, but I love the huge variety of women in these stories, and they have bad things happen to them and they can be victimized, but they're not victims, and they dish it back as much as they get it.
And by the way, didn't that go ahead and win a Stoker?
It did. It won a Stoker, and it won a Shirley Jackson, and it won like a bunch of other stuff. And Lee's gonna kill me because I don't have the list in front of me.
So casual.
Just saying. I'm just saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have went. Oh, that.
Just saying, just had to bring that up because you know I'm not going to sit on that, Angela. I can't let that go.
Yeah, no, we were really thrilled with that book, and that's one of these stories, we enjoyed telling them so much that we're continuing, you know, and that's one of the beautiful things about like the giving the devil his due. That allows that space for us to tell these stories, you know, the victims that or possibly have been victimized in our past to come forward and share that story of how of healing and of conquering, and you know, and that there is life after.
Yeah. So the final question for today. So finally, what books would you recommend to survivors who are new to speculative fiction, who've never really read horror or fantasy or science fiction, and who would like to read stories that will help them reflect on their own experiences, or even just have a great, rage read? Linda?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Obviously, I'm going to say start with Giving the Devil His Due, because when all of those stories were put together, they were put together with that as a concept, as a conscious and subconscious point of view. So I think that anthology, I like anthologies because they do give you a variety of story names. And so I'm not sure I would add anything other than what we've mentioned. I mean, I had a couple here. Oh, this Trouble the Waters just came out. And that's like a whole lot of poems and stories about finding your way through good stuff in there. And yeah, I got a poem in there. I ain't even apologizing. I am not sorry. Unapologetically not sorry.
Hillary, what would you recommend to an absolute beginner?
All right, so I'm going to mention one thing on the side too, just because if you're looking for a more fantasy spec fic and you don't want sex assault explicitly, if you cannot do it, Shauna McGuire / Mira Grant will never write sex assault, has said so on the page. It is completely safe fiction to engage with. where you will avoid sex assault. So it seems noteworthy to mention that, given the topic of conversation, that we have an explicit author who has refused and said outright, I will never write this, so you are safe with me. So that seems important for survivors. Seanan McGuire is Mara Grant. Mara Grant is Feed. Seanan McGuire is the Toby Day series and the Wayward Children series, among other things. So just putting that out there. As far as absolute beginner, I would go back to those YA titles that I was talking about, like Courtney Summers, Speak by Laurie Anderson. That one would come to mind. YA has a good way to get into it because while it still touches on very, very tough subjects, they are at the level that a 14 or 15-year-old can pick it up. So they're not, I liken it to reading a PG-13. If you'll go to the movie theater and see a PG-13 movie, if you want to dip your toes into the revenge waters, YA is probably a pretty good place to see where your limits are. And Exit Stage Left by Kate is just another one that comes immediately to mind. But that's a way to go there without some of the harder hitting aspects of adult, to just see where you land. I wrote The Hollow Girl, which is a rape revenge story. And that's basically Romany girl is sexually assaulted and her boyfriend is beat to nearly death. And so in order to fuel the spell that brings her boyfriend back, she harvests the parts from her attackers.
Nice.
So, like I said, YA is a good place, and I can always go more into that on Twitter at Hillary Monahan if you want to tap me for YA titles. But that's a good place to start, I think.
Angela?
I do have a big stack of books in my lap. But all of these titles and more. But I would say poetry is a good place to start. That was a good place for me to start because you can access the truth at your comfort level. Like Linda was saying, this apple can be talking about racism. But if I don't feel completely comfortable with getting that deep into it, I can read it as an apple. I can read it as an apple that may be a little bit bad inside. I can, and I'm, as the reader in poetry, you can access your level of comfort. But for like anger poetry, I'm going to recommend this one by Marge Simon. This is actually, and I have to look, Mary Turzillo. I always think I'm going to say her name wrong. This is some angry poetry, and this is a Bram Stoker finalist this year. So find out what happens with that. And then anthologies. I think it was Linda that said that. I love anthologies because you're not going to, we saw that with Black Cranes. One person be like, this is the ultimate story that I love, da-da-da-da-da. And then somebody else, completely different story. We all have different experiences. And that's one thing that I love about anthologies. All of those experiences, some of them are going to hit you, some of them won't. But, they're all in one book. So that's what I would say. And I do have my stack here. What flavor do you want? This is a good one, too, by Aki Flinthart, The Relics. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And this just came out. And I'll stop doing book show and tell, I promise.
No need. Keep going.
Oh, and then this one, going back to poetry. Linda will recognize this one. And of course, Sycorax's Daughters, and I think I've gone through them all. On Grotesque, I loved this one. Whoops,
that was really good too.
Yeah,
so
that was a Stoker winner last year.
Yes,
yes,
I believe so.
Yeah, so yeah, but honestly, there's just so many. And if you don't feel comfortable with something, you don't have to finish it. That's the other thing. If you start reaching a point where you can't handle this, put it away, take what you need from it and be kind to yourself.
Yeah. And, I was also going to point out that aside from YA, if you, in some ways, you want a softer landing start to it, maybe read some romance. Some romance authors do a really, really good job of handling issues like domestic violence and sexual assault and violence against women in non-triggery ways. So, if you feel at this point in your recovery that you've been healing journey, that you can't face horror or fantasy or science fiction yet, maybe take a look at romance. It's not as fluffy as people might think it is. And a lot of romance authors are actually doing really good work with.
Courtney Milan came immediately to mind when you started speaking. Courtney does some romance work that's very, very topical to, you know, social issues and things like that, but also has a great deal of sensitivity. So yeah, romance is not a bad idea either.
Yeah. So just the important thing is books can be like a safety valve for a lot of people. And maybe if you haven't had any success with, you know, if therapy isn't working for you at this point, or if you just need a way to escape, books are a good way. You know, there are movies as well, but we're not talking about movies during this session because we're talking all about books. Well, you could actually go to the Pixel Project website and, you know, check out our 16 for 16 campaign. Every year we recommend 16 books about violence against women, 16 movies about and documentaries and all about violence against women. And I don't like saying that sometimes I can't bring myself to watch certain things simply because it's just, you know, even if it's a hard-hitting documentary, because I work in this all day, and the last thing I need when I, you know, and I can just imagine how someone who is working through still in the middle of a healing process might not want to watch or read something. But yeah, like Hillary said, start with YA. Like Angela and Linda said, start with, if you're really curious, just start with anthologies as well. So we have pretty much come to the end of this session. And I've just noticed that Chupacabra has suddenly morphed into someone else.
Yes, that's now Yogi. That is the dog chair. It is the favorite chair in the whole house. And it was my favorite chair, but there's always a dog in it now. So
it was your chair. Past tense.
Yeah. And if you hear whining, that's the other one down here. He's like, you need to pet me now. And he's just kind of walking around here like, what's wrong with you? Why have you not petted me yet?
So I'm going to quickly share again for anyone who was late to the session. There are a few people. Angela and Linda have put together some really awesome anthology bundles. And, you know, Angela was talking about Tortured Willows just now, Stoker-winning anthology of poetry by Asian women, Asian poets, and speculative fiction authors. So there are two versions of this bundle. One and both have the books. They're signed. They have Lucky Charms. They have handmade goodies. And you know, if you're really slightly morbid, you know, this one of them has, you know, dirt from Edgar Allan Poe's grave.
Sustainably harvested. I did ask him, and I left dirt.
Yeah. And if you're not so morbid, there's a bundle with candles, really awesome therapeutic candles. But if you want a real horror bonanza, there's Linda's Poetic Justice bundle, which has pretty much everything. It's got swag, it's got signed books, it's got everything to get you through, you know, rage reading, basically.
There are ink pens, I'm just saying. There's a pen.
Yeah. And we're also, and if you're not in the mood for horror, there are plenty more author goodies available from authors including Eliadon Johnson, Juliet Arrelia, Eloisa James, Talia Hibbert, and more. And it's all on our Rally Up fundraising page. If Anusha is going to put the link in the comments box on YouTube, and I'm going to show you all the slide as well. So what you do is go to Rally Up at https://tinyurl.com/r4prallyup IWD 2022. It's case sensitive, so please make sure to take it down accurately. You can find out more about Read for Pixels through bit.ly/readforpixels. And also, just in case anyone who is new to the anthology and are wondering where to get it, you can get it now from Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and all other major booksellers worldwide. You can find out more about the anthology, including all the authors and what we're doing. We've got a blog tour coming up. We've also got something else I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes, couple of seconds. So you can go to bit.ly/giving the devil his due. Again, this is case sensitive, so take it down accurately. Now, for those of you who already have a copy of Giving the Devil His Due, we have teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors, including Angela, Hillary, and Linda, to offer a special anthology book plate for buyers. Each author will sign 16 book plates, and it'll be first come, first served. Each book plate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. It's the web address for the No More directory, which was created by the No More Foundation, the World Bank, and the United Nations. And basically, they have the most up-to-date listing of resources in all the UN's countries and member countries and territories. So anyone out there who's watching this, even in Timbuktu, there are helplines in Timbuktu, seriously. So, please get help if you need help. And if you're in the mood for some really great stories, and also have a list, you can buy this book and turn to the back. There are 2 pages at the back with full of resources for every continent, every region in the world, including the No More directory. So I'm gonna stop screen sharing right now. And before we go, Angela, Hillary, and Linda, do y'all have anything coming up in the next 3 months that y'all would like to announce? Let's start with Hillary. Do you have anything coming up?
I have a rom-com at the end of the year under Thea DeSalle coming out, but until then, nothing. I needed to write something that was candy for the COVID brain. That should be my tagline: candy for the COVID brain. So I have a thick Roma girl with the most well-meaning dipshit. Sorry, I did so well for the hour and a half, and then it right at the wire. And her well-meaning, endearing, but a little bit dorky Viking dude. That one's Conquest on Conti Street. So that's my next one.
Okay, Angela, what do you have next?
I have an anthology coming out that I'm actually producing through Yuriko Publishing, called Dancing the Shadows, which is for a tribute to Anne Rice, who, of course, we're all still in shock over. That is coming out on Mother's Day to honor the mother of horror. And I've got a nonfiction book called Building Story coming out. It's on pre-order now on Amazon and on my website. And that is just, it's writer craft, but it's more the specific things that have helped me, like writing from an authentic voice and the things that I've learned through my career that have helped me the most. So I've got that coming out on March 26th.
Okay, and Linda?
A lot of stuff coming in the next couple of months. But what's available right now that was just released with a beautiful cover is Apex Magazine's current issue. And I wrote a piece, a nonfiction piece, not a poem, if you can believe that, a nonfiction piece called Never Let the Light Go Out, which has some, I talk about the different ways I have come up with dealing with negativity and when bad things happen, the kinds of things that have helped me. And of course I have a Predator story coming out in June, which is like a lot about bad things. I'm just
so we also have the classic edition of Giving the Devil His Due coming out on May 25th. Now, if anyone out there who's attending this session, if you are a blogger or a blogger, please get in touch with us. We are having a blog tour, and we are providing a really neat little bundle of stuff for participating bloggers. We are going to give you the ebook and also some really cool visuals and all sorts. Linda.
Real quick, I just forgot to mention that I'm going to be the keynote speaker at the
Oh,
HWA in May.
Woo.
In person, which is kind of amazing.
I'm going to be there distracting you, screaming
I
madly.
hope so. I live for that moment.
I'll be cheering from afar in pajama pants. It's the same, right?
Okay, so I see that people are saying that they can't really reach our fundraising page, so I'm going to screen share again. So y'all, I have typed in the full, link to the fundraising page in the comments. You can see that's https://thepixelproject.rallyup.com/readforpixels IWD 2022/page/details. But you can also go to https://tinyurl.com/R4P rallyup IWD 2022. We're going to leave this up for a couple more seconds for you to take this down. I've also cut and pasted into the comments section. Y'all, can anyone let us know that whether or not you can get there now? I'm watching the comments page, the comments feed. Anyone? Y'all, okay? All right. So we have to go now. Because it's getting late for Hillary, at least, because Hillary is on the East Coast.
I'm all right. Thank you.
Stop sharing here. If y'all still can't get through, yep, the links work. Okay. Thank you, Anna. Have fun choosing your goodie and making a donation. Thank you all so much in advance for donating to us. So have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world. We hope that this session has been really useful for everyone. If you're a survivor and you're thinking of taking the plunge with writing speculative fiction as part of your therapy, just try. I mean, the worst that could happen is you write a couple of pages or a couple of paragraphs and decide it's not for you. But we hope you do try it. It could turn out to be really freeing. Right. So we're all gonna say good night now.
Good night. Thank you for having me.
Good night. Delighted to be here.
This was super fun.